Welcome to episode 182 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Jessica Wilson of iMotions. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Jessica Wilson, Technical Director at iMotions, who got her Ph.D. in neuroscience from Northwestern University. As you'll hear in the episode, she and I have been working together on a project for quite some time now, and I'm very excited to have results to share with you now. You might have heard a little about it in my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, where I alluded to it, or maybe you even participated in one of the studies I shared out across my social media in early 2021. Or maybe it's brand new to you. Regardless, this episode will talk about that study we did together and some of the other awesome work iMotions is doing. So, there are links to past episodes and books mentioned throughout our conversation, as well as ways to connect with iMotions, all within the show notes for the episode, which are waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/182. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. The freebie for this episode is the first chapter of my award-winning book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And if you already have the book, in which case, thank you, you'll also be automatically added to the list when you get your copy of the free PDF companion workbook. Both are housed in our free behavioral economics community called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. There's a link to join that global community in those show notes as well. Now let's get to it. Dr. Jessica Wilson, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, for me, we were doing in our little pre-chat, talking that we've known each other now for 2 years, maybe, I think, as we've talked through stuff.
Really?
It's been at least 18 months.
Time's flown.
I know. It feels like I know it's been at least 18 months since we were doing the first study really that we worked on. And so we had to have been talking and met before we actually ran that. So at least 18 months, probably going on, maybe not quite 2 years, but it's been a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with COVID, you just ended up with this blur in between where, you don't really remember what happened, but stuff happened. So
right. Yeah. It was somewhere in there. I feel, maybe we started talking right in that pandemic timeframe too, right when that all started. So who knows? But so I know you. Great to see you again. But can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the technical director at iMotions, their North American branch. So my background is in research and in neuroscience. A lifetime ago, I was actually studying Parkinson's disease. So doing a lot of muscle activity and working with participants. And I really enjoyed it, but I really thrived on understanding how these technologies can be applied to different verticals, different industries, which really led me to iMotions. So we're a software company that provides this platform that can integrate and synchronize different neuroscience tools. We have, a study builder platform, analysis tools, and export options, and we sell equally to commercial and academic clients. So it's my delight to get to meet all sorts of people from all over the place studying different things and see, okay, how can we sort of bridge the gap between what I know and what you know? And how can we use neuroscience tools and leverage neuroscience knowledge to advance your research and answer some really interesting questions?
Absolutely. And so I first got introduced to iMotions because the Texas A&M Human Behavior Lab is powered by iMotions for, the vast majority, I believe, of what's going on there in the lab. And so the first time I went there, which, that's been 3 years ago now for my first visit almost, of trying out the eye tracking with the glasses and all the different software and stuff. And so we have talked a little bit about the types of studies that your software does with iMotions, but can you expand a little bit on kind of what types of testing iMotions does from the perspective of the actual research, like doing the work, I guess, the scientists on your side, what the studies are, what sort of things you test and do?
Yeah, it's almost a really difficult question to answer because there's so many different applications and our client base is really all over. When I first joined the company, I was really interested in consumer neuroscience and consumer insights. So this can be everything from product testing, ad testing, image testing, and even sensory work. But what really struck me after staying at the company for as long as I have is the breadth of applications people are interested in. So automotive is one, gaming, architecture even, design, military and defense applications. There's the list really goes on. So I guess I always like to say if there's any instance in which you're recording something in terms of behavior, you just want to see someone's reaction to stuff, then usually iMotions has a place in that. But if we're talking about sort of specific research questions, a lot of what we see are, video testing. So how do people respond to different kinds of creative and how do people respond physiologically to that creative? On the usability side, which we'll get into in a little bit, how do people interact with different websites or different devices? Where do people attend to, which is where a lot of the eye tracking stuff comes in. But then also, what is the nature of people's reactions? Can we see how confused someone is with an interface? And does that relate to the subsequent behavior that we see, whether people follow through on a purchase or manage to complete a task? Yeah. And then on the academic side, we have clients working in communications, education, business, and marketing. And that's really, I think, where a lot of the interesting questions come from. And I know working in the Texas A&M lab, you've seen your fair share of that too.
Yeah. And so as far as the types of testing, though, we've got the eye tracking, like you talked about. There's some facial recognition. So we've talked about, if people are going to do a more basic, like, you go out into internet land and say, well, I'm going to look and have just some, eye tracking and see where there's awareness on, so like people were looking at this for a really, really long time. So that means it's good. Like, yay, yes, people were looking at it. Say, well, hold on.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. If you don't have the facial in there, so we talk about brow furrow.
Yes.
So if I'm looking at it, but have this face like, huh? Then it's really bad that I'm looking at it for a long time because I'm probably confused. And so that's something that you would want to tweak. And so just, a heat map without facial stuff isn't going to give you as much information. And so what's kind of the full-ish gamut of study that could be done with a lab that is powered with iMotions software of different types of tests?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think sort of your most basic setup would be eye tracking, facial expression analysis, which we've talked about, but then also skin conductance, also known as galvanic skin response, or electrodermal activity. And the three of those work really well together because you have complementary pieces of information. You have eye tracking, which gives you the attention aspect. Facial expression analysis will give you a sense of valence. So what is the nature of that reaction? Is it positive or negative? And then skin conductance gives you a sense of physiological arousal. So what is the intensity of that reaction? As can be measured physiologically. And all of that, those three work really well together. I kind of call them the Holy Trinity when I'm talking about them for people who are unfamiliar with this stuff, because they work really well together. And then also in terms of a learning curve, they're all very easy to get started with on sort of the biometric journey. But once you decide to go further down the rabbit hole, then there are many more tools that we can discuss. So we can look at EEG, so electroencephalography, and that can get at some more subtle measures like engagement, cognitive workload, approach or avoidance motivation, which we see a lot in market research. You can get into heart rate and heart rate variability, which is another, indicator of sort of emotional content and stress. You can get into respiration even, and many other different kinds of tools that are available. But I think the important thing, though, is sort of the idea that the research question should dictate the technology. and not the other way around. And often what I see is people get so excited about the technology and they want the shiny thing that they just want all of the technology available and they just want to have like a shotgun approach to their research question. And often I'll say, okay, you're really interested in EEG. What measure specifically are you interested in? And they'll say everything. And I'll say, that's not an answer. There are a million ways in which you can slice and dice neural activity, right? And so you really need to have some specific measures in mind. So I always like to emphasize, these tools are really helpful in certain ways. But at the end of the day, the research question is king, and that'll help dictate what tools you use. And part of what iMotions offers is that consultation to be able to sit down with you and say, okay, here are the tools that might best suit your question. Here's the kind of metrics you can get out of them. Here's what you should be looking for, and to really make sure we have sort of the right plan going forward.
Yeah. And so we did actually 2 tests together for my website at the Brainy Business, which was a lot of fun. And I know we're going to talk about that today, kind of what we were looking at, what we found, why we did 2 different tests and how they were run and things like that. But if you were to give, some examples of a typical type of a test, I know you're generally talking about, someone comes with a problem and you help them kind of iterate and make sure it's a question that can be answered properly by a test. Because I know from working with businesses, like you said, I'm excited about all of it. It's like, I want to know everything I can possibly know. You say, well, if we don't go in with a specific question, it's not that helpful. So how do you help with a business, if they say, we have a problem, like we need more customers, we need to see some lift in this product vertical, or we want to work on attention in the aisles or whatever it is. How do you work to turn that into a research question? What's like a type of a problem? And if you have a specific case study that you're able to share, that would be great, just for people to kind of grasp what y'all do.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take video testing as sort of sort of a sample standard method here. Usually what people want to do is they're interested in sort of what aspects of the video are most engaging that I can maybe leverage. Are there elements within the video that might be boring or would cause people to disengage, for example? Or another great method would be an A/B test. So say you have 2 iterations of a commercial and you want to see which one will be more effective and which one you want to actually take to market. Then iMotions works really well in being able to get those biosensor inputs for that A/B test. So if it were me running a study like that, I would be using eye tracking, facial expression analysis, skin conductance, maybe EEG, if I also wanted to get into approach avoidance motivation and sort of a willingness to take action on a product. But I would have people watch those 2 ads with all of the sensors attached, maybe follow up with some surveys afterwards, such as willingness to pay. How much did you enjoy this commercial? Maybe some recall tasks as well. Did you actually recall what brand we were looking at? And what we can get is look at some key elements in the video. So if there's a joke, for example, that we want to see if the joke landed, we could look at facial expression analysis and skin conductance to look at the effect of that on audiences. We could look at a decrease in skin conductance response as something that suggests disengagement or boredom with an element of the commercial. So I might be able to say, okay, for this particular prototype, we might want to rethink these 10 seconds here because it looks like some people are disengaging. And we can subsequently follow up with the eye tracking and say, okay, did people actually notice the product that we're trying to show them? Are they noticing the logo when we put it in a particular place? How can we manipulate these things, these very specific elements, and then see how people respond physiologically to those elements? From that data, you can draw some general insights that can help guide your decision process moving forward. If you notice that people aren't noticing the logo and you want that logo to be sort of a central focus of that scene, then you can explore with different placements and see whether people actually notice the logo and spend more time dwelling on it compared to distractors. If there's a joke that doesn't land or that people find confusing, then you can see that in the data, try to iterate a bit better, make a new design decision, and then follow through again and see if that improvement has helped. So being able to take that and sort of look at the specific details and see what decisions can we make to make this better, that's something that we can do pretty easily with video testing. And it's actually a method that we kind of recommend, is to have sort of multiple versions of this testing through to the design process, from animatic, for example, up to finished prototype. that way, with the data that you're using, you can actually make sure you're making the best design decisions at the time when it counts, when you're actually designing the thing and not when you have a finished product. And then the biosensor data indicates that people don't like it. It's like, well, now you're back at square one, right? So that's one example of video testing. So one example of a client of ours that's done video testing is actually the University of South Florida. This is one of my favorite stories. They actually have a sales and marketing lab in the MUMA School of Business, and they do a whole bunch of different kinds of testing, including video testing, other studies related to marketing, and they really have this resource that's open to the entire research community. One of the studies that they recently came out public with is a collaboration with Baycare Health Systems to actually look at the impact of COVID-19 infomercials and information on consumers. So Baycare actually provided the health communications and creative that they wanted for testing. And USF ran these video tests to see, okay, what parts in this very timely, very important video are people attending to most? Are there instances where they might look confused? Do they look like they might not be paying attention? And are there ways then, based off of this process and based off of this method of assessment, that we can actually improve our videos and make them more effective methods of communication for a topic that's extremely important for the world today? So that's one example of being able to take biosensor research and use that to iterate on something that can then be improved on and provided for consumers. That's just video testing, though. That's just one example. Usability is one example that we'll definitely get into with different methods. We've seen people do, sensory testing as well. So if I have different, food samples, for example, and I want to see which ones people react the most favorably to and which ones might turn people off, we can use biosensor research to assess that. I think sort of the common theme in all of these different methods is that the most effective ones have a distinct research question and distinct variables. And usually we are comparing one thing to another. So we're looking at, if we're looking at a website, we're comparing prototype A to prototype B. If we're looking at packages or videos, usually it's an A/B test. But there are other ways in which we can explore, do more qualitative exploration of where people are looking, say in a shelf setting, for example, in a supermarket. Being able to go up to a shelf and say, okay, where do people tend to look most on average? Then there's no sort of method of comparing there, but it's an easy way to get a lot of information about a population's behavior in a particular setting. And then again, use that information to manipulate certain factors, like where a certain product might be placed on the shelf, or, how you position it next to promotional collateral or even other competitors, for example. Those are just a couple of things that we can discuss.
Yeah, well, and I know from when we did the work for my site, we had the option and started out with just some version of, free scrolling, right? Just sort of to see where people go, what they click on. There's a little bit of, if you give somebody, 2 or 3 minutes to just sort of poke around and you can see, are they clicking on, is everybody going to one tab? Are people getting stuck somewhere? Do they actually watch a video that exists, or does it just sort of sit there? Are you getting the brow furrow? What are they doing? Just to have an idea, so we have that knowledge. But we also are testing something very specific. But, before we get in, we just want to see, as their fact finding on whatever their task is going to be, just kind of let them do that and learn from what happens versus having any real hypothesis about that kind of free scroll. We just want to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the study that we did, that first one, we kind of had a little bit of both. So we had that sort of qualitative first blush of when people are presented with your website, where do they naturally gravitate to? Are there certain things that draw attention more than others? Are there certain things that get ignored? What pages do people tend to navigate to? And then what do they focus on afterwards? And then after that initial, because that has to do with sort of the design and the aesthetics of it, right? What's most eye-catching. But for that second phase of the study, we adopted more of a task-based sort of approach. And we were comparing, 2 different prototypes, right? The new website versus the old website. And we had specific tasks to see, do people actually behave the way that we would like them to in terms of getting oriented to products that best fit them, or directing them to the information that you want to showcase the most? In that case, having a very specific question and having, comparative metrics across 2 different prototypes, that made it a lot simpler. And especially when you're looking at websites, because only in certain circumstances are you really just perusing for the sake of perusing. More often than not, if you're going for a website, you're looking for something specific. So especially in usability studies, you have to keep that in mind that people are going there for a certain purpose, and you have to incorporate that task into the kinds of design that you're looking at. Unless it's like social media where people are just passively scrolling through things, people are interested in the Brainy Business and they're coming there to learn something and to learn about you and the products that you have. So it's important to ask questions that are ecologically valid and that apply to, how people are actually going to be using the product you're evaluating.
Yeah. And so we'll go ahead and jump in. We'll talk a little bit more. I think we've alluded to at least some of the test and what we were doing, but for the background story and, going into this, I was doing a redesign of the website and knew that it was going to be happening in conjunction with my upcoming book. And so we had talked about, it would be fun to integrate. I really liked the idea of being able to do a study with iMotions in the process that could be included in the book and talked about at least a little bit. And then we could have, the new website that, you can go see it after the fact, that it exists when the book comes out. And so we did that research. So we had a first phase. So we did 2 different tests.
Yep.
The first one being, like you said, it was mock-ups of what we thought a new site would look like. So I had my site at that point for a couple of years. And the way that when I started the Brainy Business and switched everything over and started the podcast, I didn't know I was going to be doing courses. I didn't know I was going to end up teaching at Texas A&M. I didn't know, I would hoped a book might come out, but didn't know. And my consulting changed over time. And so it kind of became what I lovingly referred to as Frankensight, where it was like adding so many extra, like, we'll just add a tab. We'll do this. Like, I just need to it's good enough for now, but I knew that this redesign was going to be coming sooner than later. And, book launch was a perfect time to change all that out. So in that process, we had, looking at the old site, like you said, and then some mock-ups of a new site. And those were done more like an in-lab test. And I would love for you to talk about the type of testing that was done, but wanting to see, are people finding the courses that we're encouraging them to go to? And we change things up for the second test. But what can you say? What can you share about on your side of what the study was built on? Like for me, it was like, I have some theories about what I think is going to make a new site better. And so incorporating the behavioral science stuff that I knew into an updated design. So I had my designer come up with a mock-up, and then we tested it against the existing site to see if our guesses were on point and if anything was lacking that we could adjust it before we actually built a whole new site, like you said. And then you get to the other side and say, well, that's disappointing that it doesn't work. So we could figure it out before we got too far down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a ton of fun to do. So as you said, the first thing that we had people do was just a free 1-minute navigation, because this is in part aesthetics and design in addition to the actual functionality that we wanted the site to have. So we wanted to see, were there elements on each homepage that people attended to more than others, or are there certain elements that got ignored, or were people just scattered all over the place in their attention? If we're just looking at the 1-minute free navigation, both sites did pretty well. I mean, at least 1 minute is a good chunk of time. So people were able to attend to the pictures, the buttons, the different features involved. A lot of people navigated away from the homepage, and we actually, a lot of them clicked on the About page. So that indicated that your credentials and your background were really important to new visitors to your site. And a lot of time was spent reading the text based on the eye tracking. So people were really interested in getting to know you, Melina, as a researcher, your background, and how you built this business and sort of the kind of services you're trying to offer. Now, where the difference begins to happen is when we start introducing the task components. And there were 2 different scenarios that we explored, each being addressed to a separate persona. So, Melina, with your business, you were interested in two different demographics. The first being sort of the more entrepreneurial types that might be interested in specific courses or, advancing their learning on things. So learning about pricing or learning about mindset and just digging a little bit more into like the personal training side of things. But you also had this persona for corporate members. So people that might be interested for more specific consulting and information on more custom projects. Is that correct? Did you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I, over time, really evolved to have these two areas. And like you said, knowing that while the courses, anyone can take a course, but in general, for the like small business entrepreneurs, there's that DIY, jump in and do something. And for corporate projects, that's more of a larger investment time with me, things like that, and making it so it was easy for people to see where they should go and what products or services from the Brainy Business apply to them versus, again, in Frankensight, it all just sort of was a big blob, I think, of stuff. And it wasn't easy to know, I go here. So we were trying to solve that problem in the redesign.
Yeah, absolutely. What I really liked was that for each sort of persona type that you had, you didn't make it too confusing. You had two personas and you had one product that you really wanted to cater to each persona. So for the entrepreneurial small business types, you wanted to direct them most to the courses because that's where you thought the most value was for them. Whereas for the more commercial or corporate enterprise types, you wanted to send them to custom consulting and to book a session with you on your calendar, right? So these were the two tasks with the two scenarios that we then had for the study. And people had exposure to both tasks in a randomized order. So each task was preceded with an instruction about sort of the persona that you were. So imagine that you are a new entrepreneur trying to start a business and you're really interested in the Brainy Business for learning something about how you can conduct your business. Go to a product that you're interested in, click on it, put in your information, and when you're finished with the task, close the browser. Similarly, for the corporate task, it said, you are working for a large marketing department in a conglomerate. You are interested in the Brainy Business for help with a particular project. Go to the page, click on the product that best applies to you, put in your information, and then close the browser when you're done. So what we did was we looked at eye tracking, first of all, to see where are people attending in the layout and where do they actually look at the right things that direct them to the right product, or are there things that could be distracting them, that could be dividing their attention? And then we also looked at facial expression analysis as an indicator of frustration or negative valence with a particular design. So if someone is having a lot of trouble with a website, you'll see a lot of brow furrow, which indicates sort of they're not having a good time. They're frustrated or confused or trying to read things. So we often look at that in usability as just an indicator of negative valence or confusion. And then we also looked at skin conductance as just a sense of general engagement with the page and with the experience. So what you did in the new design was that you had two very clear buttons that said entrepreneur versus corporate client. And that really made the difference, right? If you actually look at the old page, there was a big blob of attention data where, the offerings are listed, but, there's a lot of confusion and people often click the wrong ones trying to actually complete the task. But on the new page, you have this really clear delineation. Are you a commercial enterprise or are you an entrepreneur? And we can see for each persona that our participants looked at, the amount of time it took for them to actually navigate to the button that they should be clicking on and then following through to subsequent courses.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I do with clients, and I think is so important in testing, which is why one of the best things about running a test like this is you're really forced to narrow down to this. Like if someone can only do one thing, I only want them to do one thing. If you are this type of person, what is that? What's the number one thing that's most important? Like we said, for a corporate client, I need to have a conversation with them. I need them to go send me an email or book a discovery call so we can talk for a half an hour and see if we're a fit for each other. And again, for the entrepreneurial thing, I want to make it really easy for someone that's interested in a course to go get a course. And I actually, in a lot of cases, I don't want to have to talk to every single person that wants a course. That's not a good use of their time or mine, and you should just be able to go pick it out and get it yourself. And that's why it's there. And, over time then is the book, is like, I want people to be able to go find and get the book if that's a fit for them. And so when you go through this, you have to narrow down that if there's only one thing. So that is a really good task that you have to do. And then you can see, is it working or not? Are people getting stuck somewhere or not? But I think it's also really important to note that the tasks in the way that they were created, like if someone's doing this themselves, I've seen far too much where someone will say, we're really curious if you can find the pricing course. Can you tell me, are you able to find the pricing course? Which is like, yeah, sure. Okay. I found the pricing course, but that doesn't indicate whether someone is actually interested in it. And if they're coming from the perspective of a potential customer that might want that, and you say, hey, you're interested in something that might solve your problem as a small business owner, go look and see what exists, because it's not like everybody who comes to your site is going to know exactly what you offer and exactly why it's going to matter and what it's called, and then go find it. And so to get into that mindset and asking a more vague question of, this is sort of who you are, where do you end up, can help you find if people would get stuck somewhere so you can fix something, versus if you sort of like inadvertently prime them by telling them exactly what you want them to do, which I think a lot of people could get into if they're not running a more formal test like this.
Yeah. There's two great points that I want to emphasize. And one, that whole sentiment of you just want to test one thing. I agree with that so strongly. In fact, a lot of the advice I give to clients is, after having done research as a scientist for, several years, I often tell people the best research is boring. You're looking at one thing and one thing only. You're making one manipulation, maybe two, if you want to be ambitious, but you don't want to go too crazy with it and have too many different variables at once, because you're just not going to get the granularity of data that you're looking for, and you're not going to get really strong insights out of it. The best research looks at one or two things, really isolates those, avoids any other sort of distracting elements or variables that could confound things, and gives you a clear answer. Is this the right way that you're going? Yes or no? Do you want to address another question? Well, that's going to be another study. That's what entire research programs are based off of, is just this continuous questioning. And it's easy for people to fall into the trap of, I can just do one study and I get so much data out of it and I can get so many insights out of it. But often, trying to rush it before you're really ready for something like that, it really robs you of a lot of the insights you can really get out of it. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. The aspect about the tasks and priming, I think that was a really good idea, because we actually saw some really interesting things. If we look at the entrepreneurial persona, so I believe the actual hypothetical was, you are a small business owner, you're an entrepreneur, and you're really interested in studying pricing. So go on the Brainy Business site, try to find a product that works best for you, and so on and so forth. A lot of people immediately oriented to the big button that said, are you an entrepreneur? Yes or no. And then once you actually get onto the course page afterwards, then it's really easy. You have two other options that are smack dab in the middle of the page with high contrast, sharp shapes, like big rectangular buttons. You have the pricing course and you have the mindset course. And people attended really strongly to each of those buttons, but attended more to the pricing course, obviously. And then everyone subsequently followed through and clicked on it. You had a very high success rate with the new website design compared to the old website. Actually, I'm looking at the stats right now. The old website, you had about a 12% success rate of actually clicking on the pricing course, which is where you wanted to take them for that persona. And the success rate went up to 70% for the new website design. So having, those really salient design elements, those big buttons, like here are your choices, that made it really easy for people. And you see that in the eye tracking data, and you see that in the subsequent behavioral metrics. So that turned out great. The second task with the corporate persona got really interesting. So we actually had, that first choice, we had entrepreneurial or, corporate, which persona do you want? That was very clear. Everyone clicked on the right one. But once they actually got to the corporate landing page, people started getting confused. And we actually saw a very distributed pattern of eye tracking data across all the different elements of the page. There were a lot of figures, text boxes, there was a video, and people appeared to have some difficulty trying to figure out, okay, am I supposed to try and find a product here? Or what am I trying to do? So you can see that in the eye tracking data. That page especially had a lot of brow furrow. Actually, if you were to look at the new website versus the old website, the new website actually had more brow furrow, which is not what we expected, considering it rated higher on ease of use and usability and likability of the design. All of the brow furrow happened on this one page, on the corporate landing page. And that's because people were exhibiting confusion over, okay, I'm this persona. I want to get more information. What exactly am I trying? What should I go for? And it just wasn't as clear to them. And we also saw this reflected in the behavioral metrics. So for the corporate task, we actually saw people did worse on the new website compared to the old one, just because the design elements just weren't as clear. So that led to some really interesting, directives that we could take for this corporate page. Like, this is the one weakness in the new design that we can really develop some new ways of trying to adapt to really highlight the consulting aspect, highlight booking an appointment with you, so we can do a better job of funneling that demographic into an action that we want them to take.
Right. And I think it's important too. So one is the reminder, we ran a test to see what would work or not. There were some elements when I was working with the designer. There were a couple ways that they were designed. And some of the things was like, I don't like how this page looks, but we're running the test. So let's see what happens. Right. But, some of the calls to action we had, there were potentially too many on the page with different buttons, but testing them to see, is the picture drawing them in here? And like you said, we were able to find that there was, it was giving too much information about this instead of just being able to say, you found the Brainy Business, you're excited to be here, have a conversation with Melina, like really clear what your next step was. And so being able to find that potentially, whether it's like paradox of choice or just cognitive load, being there's like too much here and you don't know as clearly of like pricing course, boop, like that's what I want. But making that cleaner when coming up with the final design on the website. And so we only tested these two paths essentially, but I was able to use insights from those two tests really to be able to see when we did the full redesign and all these other pages, those big buttons with large contrast really worked, and making it very clear, are you A or B? What are you doing? We were able to integrate that into other areas of the site as well. And in some cases where we had too much information, how do we cut that back to make it very clear, contact here, learn more there. You can kind of self-discover. And so as we, I think, could talk about this first test all day, there was so much interest there, but we then did a second test.
We did.
So I worked with my team after we got these insights. We found some things that worked, some things that didn't. Some was confirming, some was surprising. And that's what the best tests are, right? We're learning things on both sides. And then we go back, we made a new design for the site. And then when it went live, we had two different versions of one page that was the apply it, page that has to do with the book. And I mentioned in the book, so again, like before the site was ready, I said that this was going to be a test that people were going to do, and like all of this that we got to do before the book came out. And then it's like after that it goes live, it was kind of fun. But we had the page go live selling the book. And then we were testing two different versions of the same page and really only changed one thing, but wanted to see how social proof would impact in testimonials in the two different areas. So I had like 50 people that were nice enough to do very lovely endorsements for my book in it coming out. And so when we were in pre-sale, then we were doing this test. And so some of them that would come back, it's like a paragraph of lovely things that are said. And I've told clients for years, you don't have to use the whole testimonial, these little blips of the kind of movie trailer, like amazing, wonderful, the best business book to come out in years, like these little things you can grab that can get buried in a paragraph. You can call those out, are going to be much more impactful than doing the whole thing. And so we tested both versions, and what did we find?
Yeah, this one was super fun too. So we had this one page, and this was more like, we didn't have a specific task for people. We just said, hey, we're going to show you a page promoting Melina's new book. go through the page, see if there's anything that's interesting. When you're done looking at the page, just close the browser. And what we wanted to see was just general search behavior. So a bit of a departure from like an actual task. We weren't asking people to buy the book or anything, but just have a look at the page and see what sticks out. And as you said, sort of the difference between these two prototypes was in how we had framed the testimonials. So on one page, which I called the long condition, we had the entire paragraphs of the testimonials, so big blocks of text, because we figure, hey, more good testimonials are good, right? And then on the other iteration of the page, we had taken just the highlights of those testimonials. So smaller bubbles, fewer text, but still getting the point across. And we wanted to see, were there differences in visual attention across either of the websites? And then did that also translate to facial expression analysis content as indicated by brow furrow, against suggesting frustration, negativity, and so on. So I was looking at the heat maps, and there is a huge stark difference in how visual attention accumulated between the two pages, even though the content's really similar, like the design elements are all the same, but except for this one thing that we changed. And with the short testimonials, you had this really nice diverse pattern of visual attention across the page. You know, a lot of it was collected up top, but a lot of people scrolled down through the entire thing, paused on some of the text, looked at some of the images, really nice, you know, dispersal of visual attention throughout. So people got to see a little bit of everything, which is really nice. If you look at the long testimonial, all the visual attention is aggregated up in the very top of the page. There's very little actually going through the rest of the page. It's almost as if people scrolled down the page, looked at all the text and went, hey, yeah, no, thank you. And then went back up to the top of the page. It almost looks like that's what happened. And you see this very characteristic sort of F shape of visual attention that you often see in web pages, especially long ones. People will start at the very top of the page, and you'll see a lot of aggregation from the left to the right on the top, and on the left side going down. And then it slowly fades over time as people start skipping past things. They're like, oh, it's too much stuff. And they just start skipping through things and not paying as much attention through the rest of the page. So you really see that difference between the two. If we actually look at, draw some areas of interest for the testimonial blocks for each thing. So when you're looking at eye tracking data, you can obviously look at the heat maps, which are very pretty, very visually striking, and they give you a sense of where visual attention is allocated on a page. But what you can also do is draw areas of interest around sections that are interesting to you. So in this case, looking at the testimonials, since that was our main dependent variable here. But if you're looking at usability, you can look at particular features on a page. You can look at ad placement on a page. There's many things you can use AOIs for. But we drew areas of interest around the testimonials themselves and looked at the aggregation of eye tracking behavior there. And we found that in terms of hit time, so how quickly it took people to find the testimonials, people found the longer ones first. I mean, they're huge, they're eye-catching. So it's natural that attention will naturally be drawn to them quicker than other elements on the page. But that's about where the good things end for the long version of the site. All other measures I looked at, so the number of times people gazed within the testimonial area, people looked a lot more often at the short testimonials compared to the long. The amount of time that was spent within the testimonials was nearly double for the short testimonials compared to the long. The number of revisits, so the number of times someone looked in an area and then away at another element and then back at the testimonials again, that was also higher for the short condition. So across most of the different measures of eye tracking, it looked like less is more in this case. Just taking the highlights from the testimonials goes a long way in being able to direct attention to that area, and people will spend more time looking there, probably because it's not nearly so overwhelming. People get turned off from large bricks of text, right? And then we saw sort of similar measures with the facial expression data. And if we just look at the amount of brow furrow people showed between each prototype, there was almost 5 times as much brow furrow in the page with the long testimonials compared to the short. So not only did people spend less time looking at them, their experience in general just wasn't as good. They're like, what's with all this text? This is confusing. I don't like it. And I'm going to spend all this time looking at the top instead because I don't want to look at anything else. So there were very clear differences. And I think as someone, if I were consulting for you in this case, having done the study, I would say, based off of the information we've collected, I would go with the shorter testimonials because people will tend to focus more on those. They have an easier time with your site and they're going to have a better experience overall.
Yeah. And being able to gather more of that social proof and see, wow, a lot of really amazing people said really fantastic things about this. You're able to absorb all the goodness of those and then make your choice if you want to buy versus like, ugh, that's a lot to say. And what did they say? What's that again? And you just kind of get exhausted and are ready to bail pretty quickly. So I love, again, in this case, it proved what I expected and have known, for a long time, but being able to see, like you said, 5 times more brow furrow, less time that's spent overall learning about these important points and the things people are saying about the book. Those highlights we pulled, we want people to be able to then be, primed with and excited, it builds up some anticipation of the book that they're going to buy and receive and get excited about it. So I loved having that information to be able to go off of. And, obviously a big thanks to iMotions for doing this, multi-part test. It was a lot of fun. I know I will definitely be including pictures and things on that Apply It page. So everybody can go see those there. And there's other information about the test. And so we'll be able to showcase so you can, see some of these now that we're officially releasing. I know a lot of people. So the second one we did through webcams. So I talked about it on LinkedIn and with students versus being, having to go into a lab for the test. So some of you listeners potentially were a part of that test and now you know what we were looking at because we obviously didn't tell anybody.
Yeah, that was a ton of fun. And I think, that sort of leads to an interesting point of sort of how the tech has developed since then. Because, as you know, in the 2 years we've known each other, a lot's changed in the world. And, while primarily, we do studies on a desktop platform, we bring people into a lab, we put all the equipment on them, it gets very involved. Well, all of that changed pretty drastically once the pandemic hit. And suddenly people weren't collecting data anymore because you can't bring people into a physical lab space. It just wasn't possible. Between the pandemic, there was also, this general movement sort of in the research landscape towards collecting data from more naturalistic environments. So not working within the controlled confines of a lab, but, can we record data from people in the comfort of their own homes? Can we record data as people are moving around in an actual space? So looking more at wearables and long-term recordings and all that sort of thing. So that's sort of where our online data collection platform evolved. So we pivoted pretty heavily in the pandemic, looking at remote options. And now we have an entirely different product that allows you to record facial expression analysis like you would with a regular webcam, but then also webcam-based eye tracking data, which now removes the need from having to actually invest in eye tracking hardware, for one. But what the module allows you to do is design a study, like a simple A/B test for video or for images or website testing. And once you create that study, you can actually distribute it online. So you don't have to bring people into a lab. You're actually recording people from the comfort of their own home in a naturalistic setting where people are relaxed. And, what you get is sort of research unrestricted by the bounds of geography. We're able to send this URL out to students at Texas A&M to, again, post it on LinkedIn and get your listeners to come in and try the study. We got a wide demographic of people, which is a lot easier to get than having to line people up outside of a lab space, bring them in, deal with the logistics of all of that. So, we got some really interesting results, and the medium is completely different, but it's interesting how the technology is evolving. And, there's now more possibilities than ever for how we can collect this data.
Yeah, absolutely. As we wrap up, we've talked about a couple of labs that exist, including that human behavior lab at Texas A&M. And for people that are looking to do tests, Jessica, you and I talked about this going in is, if somebody wants to conduct a test similar to the one that I did, or a whole host of other things, you gave the example from University of South Florida, lots of cool stuff at A&M. Those types of tests, if you are a company, you're looking to run a test and want some support, reach out to me, Melina, at thebrainybusiness.com. And we could talk about doing something through the Human Behavior Lab, which is very exciting. If you are looking to build a lab, to be your own new version of, whether you're in consulting or an academic space, then what should they do?
Yeah, you can reach out to marketing@iMotions.com, and we'll be happy to learn a little bit more about the kind of work you want to do and see where we can fit in and collaborate. So building labs is our bread and butter, and we want to see you succeed. So if this is something that you're interested in pursuing, let us know. We'll be all too happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Jessica, for joining me on the show. It was fun to see you as always, and exciting to finally share this research we've been working on for such a long time.
I know, it's been so long in the making. So this is great.
Thank you again to Jessica Wilson for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? I, of course, love testing in all its forms and think it is so important for businesses. Now, I know that many of you have intent to test, and it may not quite make it across the finish line. You may tell yourself that next time you'll do the test. Right now you're under the gun, but next time you're going to have more time to plan. There's a mix of planning fallacy and time discounting there blocking your way. Episodes, which are both linked for you in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/182. But I'm telling you now, testing is so important. You don't need to do fancy stuff every time. I'm guessing the email system you use has an option for A/B testing, or you can test things on your website, or in the way you frame your conversations in sales or the back office. If you don't take the time to test, you can't know what's working. And there's a good chance you're wasting time on stuff that isn't going to help you reach your goals. When you set up a test, you have to ask really specific questions like, why am I doing this? What's the result we want? What behaviors are we trying to influence? How are we going to showcase that? I've linked to my episodes on understanding the problem you're solving and how to set up experiments, as well as many others in the show notes for you, which again are at thebrainybusiness.com/182. And if you do have a need for an experiment, maybe like the one I did for my website, but possibly in all sorts of other areas where it could be useful to have the power of the Human Behavior Lab at Texas A&M University, which is powered by iMotions, send me an email, melina@thebrainybusiness.com or melinap@tamu.edu, so we can start a conversation. Through the lab, we can use eye tracking, facial recognition, galvanic skin response, EEG, and more. Whatever you want to test, I'm confident we could do it through the lab. And if for some reason it isn't a fit, not everything needs a big test, I promise to let you know. Again, email me, melina@thebrainybusiness.com to start a conversation. And if you're looking to set up your own lab, contact iMotions directly using the links in the show notes to see if they're a fit for you. I'm excited to start testing with you. And as it's the holidays, it is the perfect time to pick up some Brainy gear for you and a friend. The Brainy Business has a shop with lots of brain-tastic goodies. You can have your holiday hot chocolate in a Brainy rocket mug, or jot down all your Brainy thoughts in a Be Thoughtful notebook. There's also an assortment of rocket logo hats and more. The items can ship to many countries and are available at thebrainybusiness.com/shop. All the proceeds help me keep making awesomely dedicated behavioral economics content for you. It's the perfect time of year to get yourself and a friend a Brainy gift. So go check out the goodies and order yours now at thebrainybusiness.com/shop. And thank you for being a fan of the Brainy Business. Thank you again to Dr. Jessica Wilson for joining me on the show today. It was wonderful to chat with and learn from you. Next week, we're wrapping up this series on testing options in a conversation with Dr. Keith Ewert of Cloud Army. It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.